Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Mary Janet had kept a painful secret for 6 years after her divorce from John Henry. She had a son, Danny, who was John's child. Their love, once vibrant, faded as John sought freedom, leaving Mary to face motherhood alone. Years later, she sent John a photo and letter revealing the truth, forcing him to confront a life he never knew existed. As John grapples with his guilt and regret, he must decide if he can rebuild his relationship with Mary and his son. This is a story of forgiveness, second chances, and the journey to healing a broken family. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. Mary Janet could hardly breathe as she signed the divorce papers. 6 years later, she sent her ex something that left him trembling with fear. How could a simple signature and a torn piece of paper hide such a life-altering secret? What could she have sent him that would make him terrified for his own future? The relentless hum of the air conditioner in the law office felt like an ironic mockery of Mary's inner turmoil. The pen, heavy in her grasp, finally fell onto the smooth, polished desk, marking the moment that shattered her world. Her fingers, pale and trembling, reflected a deeper inner quake, a silent, personal devastation. Robbie Henry, her soon-to-be ex-husband, kept his eyes fixed on a point on the mahogany desk, his jaw tight and tense. He refused to look at her. Was it out of guilt or indifference? At that moment, it didn't matter to Mary. The result was the same, a deep, irreparable void. Their love, which had blossomed under the warm skies of New Orleans Jazz Fest, surrounded by the smell of beignets and the sound of brass bands, was now reduced to this cold, sterile office. A love that had once seemed forever, now just another legal formality, a statistic. For Mary, marrying young had felt like a fairy tale, a belief that love alone was enough. But over time, the dream had turned into a gilded cage. John's friends, living carefree bachelor lives, filled his head with doubts. They spoke of last-minute trips, spontaneous adventures, and the joy of living unburdened by commitment. "You haven't lived yet," they would tell him, and their words dug deep into his psyche. Slowly, John began to long for a life he didn't know, a life that seemed incompatible with the marriage vows he had made. The warmth of their marriage, once as bright as the morning sun in the French Quarter, began to fade. John became a shadow in his own home, physically present but emotionally absent. The nights grew longer, the silences more pronounced. Mary, desperate to salvage what was left, tried everything: surprise trips, counseling, love letters. But it was like trying to grasp water with her bare hands. Love slipped away, and nothing could bring him back. Then came the inevitable, divorce. Not in a dramatic outburst, but as a quiet, steady rain that slowly drenched everything. Before entering the lawyer's office, Mary had torn the pregnancy test into pieces, 2 unmistakable blue lines that would have changed everything. She had shredded the evidence, as if destroying it could erase the truth. A new life was growing inside her, but the love it came from was fading, beyond repair. That truth was too much to bear, so she buried it deep within her. "Do we need anything else, Ms. Janet?" the lawyer asked, his voice cold and detached, like a slap in the face. She was no longer Mrs. Henry. She was just Mary Janet, a woman on her own. "No," she whispered, barely audible, her voice trembling but strong enough to make her stand tall. As she left the office, her heels echoed on the marble floor, each step a final nail in the coffin of her marriage. She couldn't look back. She couldn't allow herself to. The moment she did, she knew she'd break. Outside, the warm, humid Chicago air hit her like a wave, but it offered no comfort. The tears she had held back for so long finally escaped, mixing with the sweat on her face. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, but she quickly pulled it back, afraid of what that touch might signify. "Mary." It was his voice. John. Desperate. The sound she hadn't heard in years. Her heart twisted painfully. For a moment she hesitated. A part of her wanted to turn around, confess the secret in her purse, beg him to try again. But the other part, the one that had grown strong over the years, knew it was too late. She closed her eyes, let the tears fall, and took a deep breath. She kept walking, each step a final decision, a silent refusal. She heard his footsteps stop behind her, and that silence confirmed what they both already knew. It was over. What neither of them knew was that the story was far from finished. 6 years, a perfect life, and a hollow heart. A man's search for freedom had only led him to a place more barren than before. "The one in the photo is Danny. He is your son. I wanted to tell you. God knows how much I wanted to, but I didn't have the courage. We were so broken." And I convinced myself that you would be better off without me, without us. I thought I was saving you a burden. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I was wrong. But now it's not about me or you. It's about him. Danny deserves to know who his father is. And I can't carry this secret alone anymore. If you want to meet him, if there's any part of you that wants to find us, we'll be at Lincoln Park this Saturday at noon near the pond. If you don't show up, I'll understand. I really will. But you should know that one day he's going to ask about you. And I'll have to find a way to explain why his father didn't want to meet him. Mary, the letter slipped from his fingers, floating slowly to the porcelain tile floor like a dry leaf falling from a dead tree. John's legs gave out. He stumbled backward, his body searching for support until his back hit the cold wall. He slid to the floor, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal. His head was spinning. Disbelief, anger, regret. A giant wave of emotions hit him, drowning him. A son. He ran a hand through his hair, pulling at the strands, desperately trying to make sense of it all. A son. He had a 5-year-old son he never knew about. 6 years. 6 years stolen. 6 years of first steps, first words, birthdays, scraped knees. 6 years he could never get back. Images of that day in the law office flooded his mind. Mary's devastated look, the way she flinched, how she fled without looking back. The puzzle pieces, once scattered and meaningless, began to fit together with brutal clarity. He should have followed her. He should have demanded answers, fought for her, for them. But his wounded pride and blind anger prevented him from seeing the truth that was right there in her eyes. He bent down, picked up the photograph from the floor. His eyes scanned every detail of the boy's face. There was so much of Mary in that smile. But now he could see himself too. In the shape of the chin, the arch of the eyebrows, the way the head tilted slightly to one side. An overwhelming mixture of awe and grief filled him. The clock on the wall read 9:30 in the morning. Saturday was in 2 days, 48 hours to decide the course of the rest of his life. His pulse quickened. Could he do this? Could Hefus marry after all the silence, all the pain? But the thought of losing the chance to meet his son, of letting that child believe his father didn't want him, was unbearable. Fear and pride could not win this time. Not again. Do you think John can truly make up for 6 years of lost time? Would you be able to forgive someone who ran away from you? Share your opinion in the comments below. The reunion at Lincoln Park? A new beginning. Saturday dawned in Chicago with a lean sky. A thick blanket of gray clouds that promised rain that never came. It just hung in the air, heavy and oppressive. It was a perfect reflection of Mary's state of mind. Sitting on a wooden bench in Lincoln Park, she felt the morning chill seep into her coat, a shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. Her hands were tucked into her pockets, her knuckles white as she watched Danny a few yards away. With his 5 years of inexhaustible energy, he ran after a soccer ball, his brown hair flapping, his pure crystalline laughter ripping through the park's stillness. He was a point of light and color in a world that for Mary seemed to have faded to gray. He was the reason for everything, the anchor that kept her sane during the last 6 years of silent exile. But today his innocence seemed almost cruel, a painful contrast to the anguish gnawing at her chest. She looked at a wristwatch. 11:58, 2 minutes. In 120 seconds, the hope she had been tentatively nurturing for 2 days would either turn into relief or shatter into a million pieces. Her heart beat erratically, a war drum announcing an internal battle. What if he didn't come? The question echoed in her mind, each syllable a blow. Could she bear it? Could she look at Danny later and invent an excuse? Another layer of lies to protect his small heart. The truth was, she didn't know. The courage that led her to send that envelope already seemed like a distant memory replaced by a paralyzing fear. A small hand tugged at the sleeve of her coat, and a soft voice brought her back to reality. Mommy. Danny stood beside her, the ball forgotten on the grass. His green eyes, a direct inheritance from her, looked at her with a concern that belied his young age. Are you okay? Mary forced a smile, a movement of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. I'm fine, my love, just thinking. But before she could invent a distraction, a sound broke the tension. The sound of footsteps, not those of someone strolling, but of someone running, hurried, almost desperate, crunching the dry leaves on the path. Her heart, already beating fast, leaped into her throat. She turned her head slowly, afraid of what she would find, or worse, what she wouldn't. And then she saw him. There he was, John, standing a few yards away, his chest heaving with heavy breaths, his hair slightly disheveled by the wind and the run. His eyes, darker and deeper than she remembered, were fixed on hers. In that instant, the world around them disappeared. The noise of traffic on the nearby avenue, the barking of a dog, the buzzing of insects, everything dissolved into a deafening silence. A universe of unspoken emotions, unasked questions, and unconfessed regrets passed between them in that single devastating moment. 6 years of silence, pain and distance condensed into a single look. It was Danny who broke the spell. "Mommy, who is she?" he asked, his childish voice sounding strangely loud in the settled silence. Mary swallowed hard, a knot in her throat. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back began to well up, blurring her vision. She turned to her son, the center of her universe, and said the words she had rehearsed and dreaded for years. He is your daddy for John." The ground seemed to undulate beneath his feet. The sight before him was so overwhelming that his brain refused to process it completely. Mary was there, real, tangible. The same eyes that mixed storm and calm, the same mouth he knew so well. But there were new fine lines around her eyes, subtle marks of time and a weariness he hadn't been there to witness, to alleviate. And beside her, clinging to her sleeve like a small castaway, was the boy from the photo, his son Danny. The boy looked at him with cautious curiosity, his green eyes identical to his mother's, but with an intensity that was purely his own. "My son," John's world tilted dangerously. "This is real," he thought, the phrase repeating in his mind. He is real. All the emotions he had suppressed for the past 2 days, guilt, anger, regret, and a fragile, terrifying hope, threatened to overflow, tearing him apart inside. He swallowed, his throat painfully dry. With a monumental effort, he took a hesitant step forward. Then another, his eyes not leaving the boy's face. "Hello," he managed to say. His voice came out, broken, a pathetic sound for such a monumental occasion. How could such a small word even begin to build a bridge over such a vast chasm? Mary's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded, an almost imperceptible gesture of encouragement. "Danny," she whispered, kneeling beside her son to be at his level. "This is John, your daddy." Danny blinked, his expression unreadable as he switched his gaze from his mother to the tall, unfamiliar man in front of him. "You're my daddy?" he asked, his voice soft. But the question hit John with the force of a physical blow. He could only nod, unable to trust his own voice. "Yes," he finally rasped. "I'm your daddy." Danny studied him for a long moment, his head tilted to one side, a small wrinkle of concentration forming between his eyebrows. The silence stretched, charged with unbearable expectation. Then he asked the question, the inevitable, most simple and devastating question of all. "Why did you never come?" John's heart shattered. The weight of that innocent question crushed him. The weight of 6 years of absence, of a lifetime of ignorance. He looked at Mary, a silent plea for help, but she had her head down, guilt etched into every line of her face. It was up to him to answer. "I didn't know," John said, his voice trembling, the words coming out in a whisper full of pain. "I didn't know about you, Danny. If I had known, I swear to you, I would have been here from day one." The boy seemed to ponder this, his childish but surprisingly perceptive eyes, examining John's face, perhaps looking for a sign of Ailey. After a pause that seemed to last an eternity, he nodded slowly, his shoulders relaxing a little. "It's okay," he said. It wasn't a forgiveness. Not yet, but it was a beginning. It was a door that hadn't been slammed in his face. John let out a shaky sigh, a relief so intense it left him dizzy. He knelt down, getting on Dai's level, trying to find the right words in the whirlwind in his mind. "I really want to get to know you, Danny, if you'll let me." Danny looked at his mother, seeking her approval, her reassurance. Mary gave him a soft, encouraging smile, pushing a lock of hair from his forehead. "It's okay, my love. You can take your time." Danny nodded again, his small fingers fidgeting with the hem of his jacket. Then he looked at John, and a different light shone in his eyes. "Do you want to play catch with me?" The request took John completely by surprise. He blinked, and then a small, breathless laugh escaped his lips. Yes, I'd love to." Danny grinned, a genuine, open smile that made John's heart swell in a way he never thought possible. The boy picked up the ball and held it out to him. In that simple gesture, in the awkward toss that followed, something new began. Something fragile, uncertain, and unmount, but with the unmistakable aroma of a new beginning. The catch in the journey home. The afternoon unfolded with the fragile, hesitant beauty of a flower blooming in slow motion. John's first clumsy toss of the ball was met with Danny's laughter, a sound so pure and contagious that it dissolved a layer of the ice coating the father's heart. They played. It wasn't a real game with rules or teams, but an impromptu dance of throws, catches, and runs across the damp grass. John, who hadn't thrown a ball in years, rediscovered a childlike joy, a lightness he thought he had lost forever. He watched his son, mesmerized. The way he ran, arms slightly outstretched for balance, the concentration on his face as he tried to catch the ball, the triumphant gleam in his eyes with every small success. Every detail was a gift, a piece of a puzzle John was desperate to put together. Sitting on the wooden bench, Mary was a silent observer of the scene. Her heart was a pendulum swinging between happiness and pain. Seeing them together, the father and son, who had never known each other, was the fulfillment of a secret dream she had harbored for 6 years. But every shared laugh between them was also a knife twisting in the wound of her choice, of the stolen time, of the family that could have been. From time to time, John's gaze would meet hers over Danny's head. They were glances laden with questions, with silent accusations, and with a deep longing. There was an ocean of unspoken words between them, an abyss of misunderstandings and pain. But for now, he focused on Danny, on the miracle of that present moment. After almost an hour, Danny finally threw himself onto the grass, panting and grinning from ear to ear. "You're not so bad, Dad," he said, and the word Dad, spoken sonneturely, sounded like the most sacred music to John's ears. "Thanks, champ," he replied, his throat tight. Night crept in, bringing with it the weight of the day. Mary's apartment was a reflection of her. Cozy, organized, with touches of a life John knew nothing about. Colorful toys in a corner of the living room. Children's drawings taped to the refrigerator with magnets. A soft smell of home that contrasted brutally with the sterile emptiness of his own place. He helped put Danny to bed. The boy, exhausted from the afternoon of motions, fell asleep almost instantly. John watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling with his soft breaths. The perfection of that small being, his son, was overwhelming. The love he felt was so vast, it hurt. A pain mixed with the corrosive guilt of the lost years. He adjusted the blanket over his shoulders, a paternal gesture that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. As he left the room, he found Mary in the living room. She was standing near the window, looking at the city lights, her arms crossed over her chest like a barrier. The silence between them was no longer the silence of the park, filled with a child's laughter. It was a dense, heavy silence, charged with 6 years of untold history. It was John who broke it, his voice low, almost a whisper. "You should have told me, Mary." She didn't turn around, her shoulders hunched slightly. "I know," her voice was muffled. "I wanted to. So many times I picked up the phone, typed and deleted messages, but we were so broken. I looked at you at the chasm between us, and all I could think was that you didn't love me anymore. And if you didn't love me, how could you love a child? An obligation, a chain that would tie you to me forever." The raw honesty in her words hit him. He approached, stopping a few feet away from her. "You didn't give me the chance to choose. You decided for both of us. I was afraid." She turned abruptly, her green eyes glistening with unshed tears, a mixture of fury and pain. "You have no idea what that was like, John. To be alone with that positive test in my hand, to feel the world falling apart, and then to sit in that law office and see you unable to even look me in the face. For me, that was the final sentence. You had already left long before you signed that paper." The accusation hit him hard, because it was true. He had been angry, hurt, consumed by his own selfishness, and the feeling that life was slipping away from him. "But I never ever stopped loving you, Mary," he said, his voice choked. The confession escaping before he could contain it. "Not for a single day." A bitter, broken laugh escaped her lips. "Love wasn't enough to save us back then, was it?" "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice. "But maybe it's enough to start fixing us now for him." The wounds were open, exposed under the dim light of the room. The pain, the mistakes, the unspoken words, it was all there, pulsing between them. But in the midst of that pain, for the first time, there was also truth. A brutal but necessary truth. Mary looked away, tears finally rolling down her face. "I never stopped being afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you'd leave me again. Afraid I wouldn't be enough." He took the last step that separated them, his heart pounding. "I'm scared too. Scared that I've lost everything forever." The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was a silence of contemplation, of possibilities. We can go slowly," Mary said finally, wiping her face with the back of her hand. For Danny, John looked into her eyes, seeing the woman he fell in love with, and the strong woman she had become. For Danny, he nodded and then added, his voice firm with a new determination. "And for us too." From that day on, a new fragile routine began to form. John became a constant but careful presence. He didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to scare her away. He would show up at school dismissal, and Danny's smile upon seeing him was like a balm for his soul. He helped with homework, discovering a world of letters, numbers, and colorful drawings. He learned that Danny was obsessed with dinosaurs, especially the T-Rex, and that his favorite juice was grape, the purple one. With Danny, the connection blossomed every day, natural and strong. They built with Legos, watched cartoons, and John even learned to do the voice of the villain in bedtime stories. But with Mary, the ground was still unstable. There was a cautious cordiality, a dance around the wreckage of the past. They talked about Danny's day, about bills and logistics, but rarely about themselves. The walls she had built around her heart were still standing, but John noticed with growing hope that they no longer seemed so high. He saw small cracks forming, tiny glimpses of the Mary he loved, in a spontaneous smile, in a prolonged look, in a gesture of concern when he looked tired. And he clung to those moments, to those small victories, like a thirsty man clings to raindrops in the desert. He knew the journey would belong. But for the first time in 6 years, he was no longer lost. He had a map, and the destination was a place called family. The legacy and the journey home. Autumn in Chicago doesn't have the vibrant colors of the North, but it carries its own beauty, a softness in the air, a golden light that seems to bathe the city in nostalgia. It was on an afternoon like that at the Lincoln Park Autumn Festival that the fragile tapestry they were weaving gained a new thread, stronger and more colorful. The air was filled with the sweet smell of cotton candy and the salty aroma of popcorn, mixed with the sound of pop music from the speakers and the laughter of dozens of children. Danny, as always, was a dynamo of energy running ahead, his face illuminated by the sheer joy of existence. John walked beside Mary, his hands in the pockets of his jeans, a posture that tried to look casual, but hid the attention of a man walking on eggshells. They were an almost perfect image of a family, but they both knew the precariousness of that scene, the distance that still existed in the space between them. The sound of dry leaves crunching under their feet was the only dialogue. It was Mary who spoke first, her voice soft, almost a murmur. "He's so happy." John turned his face to her, a small smile touching his lips. "He deserves all the happiness in the world." Their eyes met for an instant, and in that brief contact, a silent truth was shared. Danny's happiness was the common ground, the bridge over the chasm. Suddenly, Danny's voice called to them, full of urgency and emotion. "Mommy, Daddy, come see this." The word Daddy still caused a small jolt in John's chest, a wave of warmth and gratitude he doubted would ever disappear. They followed the voice, and found Danny standing in front of a makeshift stall, where several children were leaning over small tables, concentrating, brushes, pots of colored paint, and on the tables, dozens of pumpkins of all sizes. Danny took a brush with solemn determination and looked at them, his green eyes shining with an idea. "Let's paint a pumpkin family like us," the question, so simple and so profound, hung in the air. John looked at Mary with his heart in his throat. He saw in her eyes a reflection of his own emotion, a vulnerability she rarely let him see. A slow, genuine smile bloomed on her lips, breaking the mask of caution. "Of course, my love," she said, her voice slightly choked. They sat on the small wooden stools, one on each side of Danny. John chose a tall, slender pumpkin. Mary chose one with a rounder, more elegant shape. And Danny, with all the care in the world, selected a small, perfectly round one. "Mine is the smallest because I'm the smallest," he explained with irrefutable logic. They painted in a comfortable silence broken only by Danny's instructions and their laughter. The outside world, with its complexities and pains, seemed to recede, leaving only that small circle of light and color. John's fingers, accustomed to the precision of architectural blueprints, proved surprisingly clumsy with the child's paintbrush. He tried to paint a smile on his pumpkin, but the result was a crooked, comical line that made Danny burst into laughter. "Dad, it's all crooked." In the midst of the laughter, Mary leaned over and with her thumb wiped a spot of black paint from John's cheek. It was a quick touch, almost accidental, but her fingers lingered there for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. His skin was soft, the gesture charged with an ancient intimacy. Time stopped. John's heart stumbled. He looked at her, and in her eyes he saw not only the mother of his child, but the woman he had never stopped loving, the girl from the village fair, the bride at the altar, the wife he had abandoned. She looked away quickly, her face flushed, but something had changed. An invisible wall had turned to dust. When they finished, the 3 pumpkins stood side by side, a big one, a medium one, and a small one, all with the same crooked, happy smile. "That's us," Danny declared, clapping, his face radiant with pride. "Our family." John swallowed hard, his chest tight with an emotion so strong it almost choked him. "Yes, son," he whispered, "that's us." Later that night, the stillness of the apartment was different. Danny was sound asleep, perhaps dreaming of smiling pumpkins. John didn't leave as usual. He stayed, wandering around the living room, knowing that tonight was a turning point. Mary was on the small balcony, looking at the starless sky. Darkened by the city's light pollution, he approached in silence, stopping beside her, his shoulder almost touching hers. The night wind brought the smell of rain and wet earth. "Do you still think about that day?" he asked, his voice low, breaking the silence. The day at the office? She didn't need to ask which day he meant. There was only one. She hugged her own body, a gesture of self-protection. "Every day," she confessed. "Every detail. The sound of the pen on the paper, the hum of the air conditioner, the way you didn't look at me." Her confession was a knife in his chest. "I was a coward," he said, his voice with regret. "I should have gone after you. I should have knocked down your door if I had to. I should have fought." She turned her face to him, her eyes glistening under the faint streetlight. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "And I shouldn't have run away. I should have screamed, made you listen." Emotion overcame him, her too. The air between them vibrated with the pain of the past and the fragile possibility of the future. Mary began, her voice trembling. "Let's try again, for real. Not just for Danny, for us." The question hung between them, laden with the weight of 6 years of separation. She looked at him, her eyes searching for his in the gloom, looking for any sign of doubt, any hesitation. "What if we're wrong again, John? What if we hurt each other again? I don't know if I can go through all that one more time." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His hands found her face, holding it with a gentleness he didn't know he possessed. His thumbs traced the path of her tears. "We might be wrong. We probably will be. We're human. We're imperfect. But I'd rather be wrong 1,000 times by your side than be right alone. I don't want to spend another day wondering what if." A so escaped her lips and she leaned into his touch, her forehead resting against his. He wrapped her in his arms, holding her with a strength that said everything words couldn't. It was a hug that begged for forgiveness, that promised protection, that celebrated their reunion. "I missed you so much," she whispered against his chest, her voice broken. "Me too," he replied, his vision blurred by his own tears. "I was lonely for 6 years, even when I was surrounded by people." And there on the balcony of an apartment in Chicago, under a starless sky, they were no longer alone. For the first time in a very, very long time, they were together. They were the future of the family. The embrace on the balcony was not a period, but a comma, a necessary pause before a completely new sentence. From that night on, the air between John and Mary changed. Caution gave way to a rediscovered intimacy, hesitant like a child's first steps, but undeniably real. John's nights on the living room sofa were replaced by whispered conversations in the kitchen long after Danny was asleep, where they no longer spoke of the past with pain, but with the curiosity of archaeologists unearthing an ancient city, trying to understand how the ruins were formed so they could build something new and stronger on top of them. He learned about Mary's fears as a single mother, the sleepless nights with fevers, the crushing loneliness of Sunday afternoons. She learned about his emptiness, the professional success that never filled the hole in his soul, the belated understanding that the freedom he sought was, in fact, the loneliest of prisons. They were with infinite delicacy falling in love again, not with the memory of the other, but with the people 6 years of pain, growth, and solitude had transformed them into. One day, on a typical rainy November afternoon in Chicago, one of those that washes the city's dust and leaves the smell of earth in the air, Danny came running from the small table where he was drawing, his face flushed with excitement. He waved a sheet of paper with a fervor that only a 5-year-old possesses. Look what I made." John took the drawing. His heart, which he thought had already gotten used to strong emotions, skipped a beat. On the paper, under a rainbow of 7 crooked colors, were 3 stick figures, one tall, one medium, and one small, all holding hands, which made John's throat close up. However, it was the words written in shaky, mirrored letters above the figures that got him. "My family." Mary knelt beside Danny, her eyes shining. "My love, it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Danny, puffing out hishist with pride, pointed to the refrigerator. "Can we put it there with the others?" "We can," John asked, looking at Mary, a request for permission that went far beyond taping a drawing to the refrigerator. She smiled, a smile that reached her ayes and lit up her whole face. "Of course we can. That's where it belongs." Together, the 3 of them walked to the kitchen. John lifted Danny so he could pin his manifesto up with a sun magnet. And there, among utility bills and reminders, the simple, powerful drawing declared a new truth. My family. It was no longer a maybe, a what if. It was real. The first cold snap of December came as a surprise. A polar front that made Chicagoans pull their coats out of the back of the closet. From the apartment window, they saw the white sky and felt the wind whistle. Danny, who only knew the cold from the air conditioner, was ecstatic. "Is it snowing?" he asked, his nose pressed against the glass. John laughed. "No, champ, it's just a little cold." But Danny's question ignited a sparkle in Mary's eyes. She disappeared for a moment and returned with bags of cotton balls, rolls of tape, and scissors. "If there's no real snow," she announced with a mischievous gleam, "we'll make our own." And so, in the middle of the living room, they embarked on the most unlikely mission. Building a snowman out of cotton balls, they rolled cotton balls that came apart. They taped them together. They laughed at the lanky structure that insisted on leaning toonside. John lifted Danny onto his shoulders so he could place the head in position. Mary found an old scarf and a cowboy hat to adorn the creation. The result was a lopsided, strange, and absolutely perfect figure. "We did it!" Danny shouted, dancing around the snowman. John watched the scene, his heart overflowing. He looked at Mary, who had a tuft of cotton stuck in her hair. Her cheeks were flushed from the effort and laughter. In that moment, under the soft afternoon light, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He approached her, picked the cotton from her hair, and the words came out before he could think. An impulse straight from the soul. "I love you." It wasn't a whisper. It was a declaration. Mary's eyes widened for a second. Then they filled with an emotion so profound he felt he could drown in them. "I love you too, John," she replied, her voice steady. No hesitation. It never stopped. It was then that Danny, stopping his dance, looked from one to the other, his head tilted. "So now we're a real family." The question hung in the air, simple, direct, demanding a definitive answer. John knelt down face to face with his son. He hugged the boy tightly, burying his face in his sweet-smelling hair. "Yes, son," he said, his voice choked. "We are a family." Mary joined the hug, wrapping her arms around the two men in her life. Her face pressed against John's back. She loved and cried at the same time. And there on the living room floor, hugging a snowman made of cotton balls under the gray Chicago sky, they were no longer three broken people trying to fix themselves. They were one. They were a home built not on perfection, but on the ruins of the past, cemented by forgiveness, the courage to try again, and the unconditional love that, after all, was the only thing that really mattered.